Hey folks, our OS Reviews. You're watching our retro review of the Samsung Saga. This is a Windows Mobile 6.1 Professional Edition smartphone that was released way back in 2010, and it was one of the last Samsung devices that ran on Windows Mobile that was released in the US. It was on contract with Verizon for $200 with a service agreement, which is quite pricey by today's standards, but it features a touchscreen display, it features Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, GPS, and also 3G connectivity, in addition to an optical trackpad and also a full QWERTY keyboard, which are all pretty interesting tweaks. Back then, Samsung still wasn't as big as a player in the cell phone industry as it is today, and their phones were met with more of a lukewarm reception, and the same can be said about the Samsung Saga. It was under the radar, but it performed quite well, but the customization on top of Windows 6.1 is kind of what made this product unique at the time. A competitor of the Samsung Saga was ironically Samsung's own Epix, which ran on at&t, had a faster processor and better specifications, and also had a QWERTY keyboard and also a touchscreen display. So I think that Samsung kind of outdid themselves by providing two versions of the same phone, but one with better specs at the same price. So unfortunately, the Samsung Saga wasn't as popular as perhaps it should have been. Taking a look at the design, it's crafted entirely out of a soft touch material, so it feels very solidly built in the hand and reminiscent of the Samsung Blackjack 2 and also, again, the Samsung Epix. The front device features the tactile QWERTY keyboard, which is nicely spaced and risen above the surface for easy texting and dialing by feel. The buttons are nicely rounded and they're pretty easy to type and text on. They're not as good as a BlackBerry in terms of layout, but they have a tactile crunch to them when you press on them, which is certainly very good to use. There's also dedicated controls for the number D-pad on the side here, which is easy to press on if you're dialing. The optical trackpad, unlike on the Samsung Omnia, is actually very, very large, and as a result, it's quite easy to navigate around. It feels like an actual cursor or a mouse on a computer, which is very impressive. There's an OK key. Unfortunately, it means that there is no four-way navigation toggle, so if you do want a mechanical way of navigating, this phone is probably not going to be for you. The optical mouse can also be set for a four-way D-pad that you can actually navigate through, but you still have to use touch rather than using it as a button. The sides also feature the Windows key, the two hotkeys, which were spaced a bit awkwardly because we prefer them to be on the outsides. There's also an OK key, power on and off keys that also dub as talk and end keys. The screen itself is quite bright and vibrant, which we'll see in a moment. It's a resistive touchscreen, so that was the norm back then, but it offered handwriting recognition as well. Again, as a QWERTY keyboard touchscreen phone is considered, it actually is relatively slim. There's a bit of a fake leather build on the sides, which provides a nice amount of styling and also a nice grip when you're holding it. The left-hand edge is dominated by a volume rocker that's tactile, easy to press, and also a lock switch, whereas the bottom is completely bare, and the right-hand side features access to a lock switch. So on the side here, there is a port for the proprietary Samsung charging port, which is a bit of a caveat. You can't use a micro USB port here. And the top features a power on and off switch, which is a bit redundant because there's already a power switch on the side, and also a 2.5mm jack. So unfortunately, there is no kind of comfortable universal port on here. You have to use a 2.5mm jack. There's also a built-in stylus, which is a telescoping one, which is pretty nice. It's metal, it's pretty comfortable to write on and to use the touchscreen with if you don't want to use your finger to use the touchscreen display. And finally, in the back, there is a self-portrait or vanity mirror for taking selfies, and also a 2-megapixel fixed focus camera. You can also record video as well. So by 2 megapixels, that's absolutely dismal by today's standards, but back then, it actually was quite acceptable. There's also a loudspeaker, but unfortunately, it was a bit muffled when you set it against a surface, as one can expect. The bottom features just a Verizon logo and a Samsung logo. It's quite typical for Samsung phones at the time for this kind of design. And behind the soft touch material, you have access to a SIM card slot and the battery. You might be thinking, this is a Verizon CDMA phone, why does it have a SIM card? Well, no folks, this phone doesn't have 4G LTE. It has a SIM card because this is both a GSM and a CDMA phone. It's a Verizon world roaming phone, so if you leave the US, it automatically uses a SIM card slot for connecting to a different network, but you still have the same phone number, so you can actually use it if you were a business user. And as with all Windows 6.1 devices, it has corporate email support, which makes it a great business phone in addition to entertainment for watching videos and also browsing. Take a brief look at the actual operating system experience. Of course, course, it's Windows Mobile and not Windows Phone as we have today, but it still is pretty interesting to take a look at what Samsung did on top of Windows Mobile 6.1 Professional Edition. Again, they did a optical trackpad, which is also pretty sensitive and responsive, but you can also tap on the screen to navigate around. What's unique here is that Samsung incorporated one of their Touch Wiz tabs, which means that they have easy access to some special icons on here. So for example, we have access to some tabs between connections, favorites, contacts, settings, and these are some unique tweaks that Samsung did on top of the traditional operating system, just like they have on top of Android today. So for example, here we have a traditional widget clock that we can customize for time and date information, some connection applications that's been installed by Samsung, including a Wi-Fi agent, and of course, the unique thing here, you can also roam it overseas and use the GSM in addition to CDMA for calling people. Favorite applications that you can set include Opera Mini that was built on here, contacts list that you can call, and also settings for the battery life, indication here for the wireless optical trackpad, for the SD card, for locking the screen, and also for the amount of memory that's remaining. There's also a simple tab for you to get more applications in the App Store, and also some updating notifications that are also released. On the very top here, you have access to the battery information, to the speaker information, to the reception, and this is the wireless information that tells you how much bars of reception you have for Wi-Fi, and also by pressing on the wireless manager, you can toggle on and off between the phone, the Bluetooth, and the Wi-Fi modes. And you can see here, the resistive touchscreen actually isn't that bad. It's quite sensitive for the time, and actually does a pretty decent job of inputting the amount of text that you need. Also built on here is Windows Office Mobile, so you can actually create, edit, and view Excel Mobile, Excel PowerPoint, and also Word documents, which is pretty impressive for the time. It makes it a very good device for basic usage, especially for road warriors on the go that are looking for something that can bring both productivity and entertainment into one. Of course, with a built-in keyboard here, you can type a lot faster than the built-in on-screen virtual keyboard, and the virtual keyboard is tiny. You have to use the stylus to use it, because compared to a physical keyboard, for example, you can see how all the keys are just absolutely tiny by comparison, but at least it's built on here. You can also have handwriting recognition, which is kind of interesting. So in order to access that functionality, we're going to take out this device here. It tells us how to use the transcriber, which was built onto most Windows Mobile devices. We can write things like hello. It's going to be a little bit difficult for it to recognize that, but it does a good job of doing it. And the keyboard itself is also very responsive and easy to type on. So this is a test. And there's also, of course, autocorrect, which works pretty well. And it's overall not a bad keyboard at all. And you can see how it automatically tells you the words that it thinks in a smart dictionary. There's autocorrect. You can bold text. You can highlight text pretty easily. So as far as productivity is concerned, it's not the worst device in the market, and it did a pretty good job of doing that. The memory was a bit limited, but with the micro SD card slot on the back, you can also expand on the memory pretty easily. So exiting out of those features, we can take a look at all the full features in the Programs menu drawer, and that gives you a better idea. Now the optical mouse, again, can act as a traditional D-pad, as you see here, but it can also act as a more traditional mouse, which is interesting. Going to Settings, System, into Optical Mouse. You can select from optical mouse or a four-way to a mouse, and you also can change the speed. So now it's going to be an actual mouse, and you can see the mouse appearing on screen, which is kind of interesting. I slightly prefer the four-way navigation toggle, except for when I'm in a web browser, and that's when I prefer the actual mouse itself. But it's a nice way that you can customize between the different settings on the device, and it works pretty well. There's also kinetic scrolling on board, so you can actually scroll up and down from lists, as opposed to having to use the tiny scroll bar on the right-hand side, which was something that past phones had to do. So you have some more information about the phone here, including the memory on board, the customer feedback, the optical mouse, regional settings, wake-up button, and so on and so forth. The programs list, built-in programs are pretty limited. You had some basic games on board, including Bubble Breaker, which was a classic on most Windows devices. So you have any bubbles in a row that you can break. It's a nice time waster, but you can also download more games if you want to through the Windows Mobile App Store. And there's also Active Sync on board for syncing documents and emails with a computer. You have to have a PC running on Windows. Taking a look at the camera on board, at 2 megapixels, it's nothing to write home about. In fact, at the time, it was even a bit low in megapixel count. With that being said, it's not that bad. The angle of the lens isn't that bad either, so it does capture things at a nice wide angle, or a realistic angle at least, and it's pretty fast in terms of capturing your shots. Now, video quality is not that good, but you can at least have a few adjustable modes, including the settings, the ISO, the white balance, and the timer, and also some special effects. So Samsung did put in a pretty good interface on top of the camera. We can view back the image here. You can see that it's a pretty good job. You can also slide up and down between the different shots. So macro modes need a little bit more work, but for long distance landscape shot, it's not the worst camera out there. So an okay interface is being implemented from the manufacturer. Otherwise, we have a basic built-in Internet Explorer, which is for browsing the web, a file explorer for looking at files on your micro SD card. There's a mobile link, your notes, which you can draw and doodle on, and also includes a basic voice recorder. So, for example, let's try that. I can say hello. You can see how it's quite responsive. It does a pretty good job of recording your different movements. Now, probably the most important aspect of this phone, or of any phone, is actually the phone and the call quality itself. And I have to say, as a phone, the device doesn't really disappoint. Sound quality and audio quality is excellent, and reception was really strong even here in Washington. And using the GSM quad-band network was a bit weaker, but at least you have that functionality built in, as opposed to other devices that lack that feature natively. There's also a remote desktop mobile, which means that you can actually hook up the phone to a computer, and then you can view your Windows screen from your phone screen. So it's a kind of neat feature if you are a business user. There's also a modem link to connect to the modem, a smart converter, a task manager, a tip calculator, VZ App Stores, which is the Verizon version of the App Store. It cycles back and forth. There's a world clock, customized by, of course, Samsung. It's a nice design going on. You have a world clock. This is something that Samsung did. Windows Media Player for playing back MP4 video files, for playing back MP3 sound files. It worked pretty well. And there's also, of course, a task list that you can check off whenever you're done with something. So the list of features is really complementary and quite full. So one of the last features I'm going to take a look at here is going to be the web browsing experience. So I'm going to go and use Opera because I think it's a bit faster than the traditional web browsing experience using Internet Explorer, which is a bit outdated. But you can see how the actual experience here is not bad at all. We typed up Samsung Saga, and we're connected using Wi-Fi, and it's not really terrible. Connect scrolling is on board, and I can see that it's pretty fast. There's a bit of checkerboarding happening if I try to go too fast, but I can tap on something like Fun Arena's website, and it will tend to go to that site after a few seconds of loading. You can open up multiple bookmarks. Of course, if you try multitasking too much, it's going to be a slight issue, but it's not too bad either. Again, web browsing isn't the fastest in the world, but then again, you shouldn't expect it to with a 400 megahertz processor. But overall, it definitely works if you have a bit more patience and you wait for a bit longer. It's not the worst web browser experience in the world. So let's go back. It's going to go back there. I can check out something else, perhaps a scene has fully loaded. We can see how it has loaded the device, and you can see the videos will play back as well. So all the elements are here. The text has been reflowed, so it's not a bad web browsing experience at all. You can see how all the things and graphics show up pretty well. It's not an HD screen or anything, but it definitely doesn't disappoint either. So overall, it's a pretty nice web browsing experience that is easy to use, and I think corporate users and also for basic entertainment does the job pretty well and did the job pretty well. So lastly, we're going to have to say that the Samsung Saga device is a pretty good smartphone. Back when it was released, it was really solidly designed due to the fact that it has a touchscreen, an optical mouse, a great QWERTY keyboard, and a relatively slim and small form factor. The camera is probably the weakest link on this particular smartphone because it also is a great world-traveling phone with both CDMA and GSM bands. But the sad thing here was when the phone was released, Samsung kind of buried their own grave, just so to speak, by releasing a similar phone with better specifications. With that being said, the Samsung Saga is still an excellent phone and a phone that we think should be remembered. Thanks for watching this retro review here at OS Reviews. This has been a look back at the Samsung Saga Windows 6.1 smartphone.